Thanks very much, Nuria, and very much appreciate both of you joining us this evening online. Back to the stage here, and I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Kirsten Dunlop, who is the Chief Executive of the EIT Climate Kick. Kirsten, if you won't mind, that is, of course, Europe's leading climate innovation initiative. They're also a member of the Green Growth Group. I'd like you to perhaps introduce the initiative, but also tell us how you see the role of innovation in the context of corporate climate action plans.
Thank you, Peter, and it's a pleasure to be here, and proud to be a supporter of the Spanish Green Growth Group, in which a couple of our core partners are members and leading protagonists. We are a European agency for the development of innovative solutions and for the deployment of innovative solutions in systemic change processes, as Tony referred to, and we're very much focused on how to source new ideas from all over the world. We operate in 39 countries and run global initiatives like Climate Launchpad or Climathon that is really servicing and surfacing new ideas from very, very early stage development and then taking them right through acceleration and into scaling. But most importantly, we partner with city governments, with regional governments, and with corporates to work out how to deploy innovation and new innovations in such a way as to effectively transform the ways in which we're living, moving, managing materials, thinking of infrastructure and living. So as an organization, as part, if you like, of the European infrastructure for innovation, development and deployment, we are also a public-private partnership. Very much to your point, Nuria, we operate as a community structure, bringing together over 450 organizations who are our partners, from micro SMEs and SMEs to universities, large corporates, city governments, NGOs, and individual entrepreneurs all over Europe and increasingly over the world, and expanding through an alumni network. Our role is to see and to act on possibility. And I think this is where it comes to the question of how does innovation play a role for corporate climate action plans? You referred at the beginning to making something practical. I would say the role of innovation is about making it possible. And this is really about the relationship between, well, if you like, the engine room of transformation and the very, very difficult relationship we now have to negotiate between what is possible and what is feasible and what is needed. And the gap between that is enormous. And that gap will only be filled and be made by the efforts of innovation, but not innovation in the way in which we've been doing it. So I would describe the role of innovation in relationship to corporate action plans as being one where I would actually begin to move the word climate out from being a separate category into a wholesale business transformation. In fact, one of the things that does slightly worry me is that we are still talking about a climate strategy when in fact for every large corporation on the planet we are needing to talk about a strategy for wholesale business transformation that leads to planetary regeneration and to new market economics and new economic models. And in that space of complexity, of uncertainty, of turbulence, of risk, which is transition risk, it is climate risk, but fundamentally actually it's strategic risk. And increasingly it's becoming strategic necessity as well as strategic opportunity. We do not have a way of effectively transforming core business models within capital markets in short-term extractive paradigms for economics in 9 years effectively. And I would wish to bring in a voice of science that is really pushing us to accept and acknowledge decarbonization by 2050 is too late. It's decarbonization by 2030 we need. And for that, we do not have answers. So here, this is the space of innovation. Practically speaking, if we're talking about pragmatics and the application of really critical principles for acting, the role of innovation is to generate options. It's extremely difficult for anybody in a board of directors to take decisions without something that looks like an option, a range of options that in some ways have been developed with a sense of feedback loops and an understanding of how they could effectively replace the core and how they constitute viable alternatives for letting go of the present. because the challenge of transformation, business model transformation, is not just the adoption of new solutions, it's the willingness and the ability to let go of existing business models, lines of assets, sources of income, and to make leaps of faith into entirely new markets. So when I referred to the need for innovation to be different, this is not investment in diversification of business lines or investment in substitution solutions. This is investment in whole-scale transformation. And that requires a widespread portfolio of many different innovations working quickly with businesses at every single point at multi-scales. And most importantly, it involves really innovation in industrial ecosystems. I think maybe one reflection I would make looking and thinking about the principles that have been developed here, we need business and industry to act as protagonists for an entirely new economy that is based on intersectoral, regenerative ecosystems where we bring multiple properties of the material of the physical world together and multiple dimensions of business models. So we solve for many things together. And that's uncharted waters in our sectoral thinking. So that's the role that innovation seeks to play and is seeking to play in partnership with large industry.
So thank you, Kirsten. We need more of you, and we need to amplify that message thoroughly, because clearly, and as someone was asking in the questions, we now have a chance for you to get engaged in this conversation. Thank you to those of you who've asked questions through Slido. There are a few here. So without losing too much time, recognizing we have our two country delegations to close this meeting at 10 minutes to the hour, we have about 15 minutes. But first, I'd like to give the first chance of a question to the audience. And I think we have a group member of the Green Growth Group here present in the form of Ika Terai, who wanted to ask the first question and to tell us how they've contributed to the work. So if there's a microphone, we have our speaker here in the second row.
Okay, thank you so much, first of all. And congratulations for the organization of the event. My name is Maria, and I lead mitigation and carbon market projects in Ecoterrae. As part of the Spanish Green Growth Group, I would like to stand out that we have offset the carbon footprint of this event through a renewable energy project verified by gold standard at United Nations. So we are in a carbon neutral event right now. My question for the panelists is I would like to know how are you going to manage those emissions that cannot be reduced when direct abatement is too costly or just the technology are not ready? Do you have offsetting targets in your strategies? I mean a specific action on a national or international scale. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think the subject of offsetting is one very live in this conference. So how the world has changed on that, hasn't it? And over the decades, the role for that has certainly come into spotlight. So I don't know, perhaps we can go to one of you online or to a business that has a limit or a process to put offsetting in its right place within the business. Mm-hmm. Would anyone like to take that question?
Thank you. So maybe I can start. So from Telefonica side, as we have shared, we have a net zero commitment, and that's not possible without offsetting, because we can reduce emissions aligned with the 1.5. So we have been already reducing 61% of our emissions, but we know that we for the moment it's not possible to become a net zero company without offsetting. So what we are doing is we have committed to start offsetting our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions in Europe and in Brazil in 2025. So all of our emissions will be, we will reduce emissions until 90% of our emissions of Scope 1 and Scope 2. And the remaining emissions, we will neutralize them, supporting projects that absorb carbon from the atmosphere, mainly nature-based solutions. So forest and other projects that we can really regard on. And for sure, I mean that they have the gold standard, VCS, and other credible labels that can really be confident that the project will be remain there and will have an impact also on social aspects and biodiversity.
If I may, Peter, from Nathaly's point of view.
Yes.
First, we are focused on reducing our carbon footprint directly, by boosting renewable energies, or decarbonizing natural gas by developing renewable gases. But for example, 3 weeks ago, we did our first LNG cargo with offsetting emissions with a renewable project in Latin America. So we think offsetting will be needed for the remnant emissions that we cannot neutralize, but we are not very fond of doing so before we do the first target, which is decarbonize our portfolio.
Thanks, Nuria. It's good to hear that, because I had a conversation this morning entering the COP with one of the directors from World Wildlife Fund, and the discussion there is should we be capping the amount of offsets that businesses use, and when will they use them? Will they use them from now, or will they use them after they've done the reductions to 90% like you have suggested? I don't know if banks have views on that, Tony?
Well, for scope 1 and 2, which is not so critical for us, we already offset the emissions that we still have. We have a target to become 100% renewable energy by 2030 for all the countries where we are. But that will mean practically reduce 90% of the CO2 emissions in scope 1 and scope 2. But now we are already offsetting for our scope 1 and 2. For the finance emissions is another point. No, we following the guidelines defined by the Net Zero Banking Alliance and the UNEP, which at the end we consider the offsetting as the last resource, only when obviously our clients cannot reduce through investments, through changing the business model or whatever. And they have to be certified, they have to be the quality that we need. So for the moment, we are not, let's take into account that any bank have the emissions from the whole economy through financing, because we are financing the whole economy. So it's not a question to offset today, but the idea is obviously that those emissions that we are not going, our clients are not going to reduce, we will have to take into account the emissions that they are going to have, and they are going to have offset the 2040, 2050, not now, obviously.
Tony, I'll come back to you because you have a few questions here in the list, but before I do, Kirsten, I'd like to, so I imagine a lot of your members are small startups, and you have a mixture of members, as does the Green Growth Group. It has SMEs as a part of it and large firms. Today, you've heard a lot from the larger firms, but can you talk to the needs of entrepreneurial startups, and what would you, Kirsten, say to smaller companies that may not have the intellectual and sort of analytical resources to make plans which are very as detailed and requiring as much sort of input and investment as these, but yet they still need to be a part of the solution, and there are so many, and there's such a diverse sectors. So what would you say to SMEs to help them innovate, to transform their businesses to net zero?
Well, that's actually one of the biggest concerns that we have, in fact, because we have a significant number of SMEs in our partnership, and I'm involved in a group working on support of SMEs, and registering recently that 98% of Europe's economy is SMEs, which is pretty extraordinary, really. Our observation is it is indeed extremely difficult. There's simply neither the resources, the capacity, the capability in many cases. But there is, in a European context, for example, a huge strength in the fact that we very often have SMEs formed into clusters, industrial ecosystems and clusters, where there is, in fact, a real opportunity to work and to act together and to apply exactly very similar principles of co-action and co-determination and broader supply chains. So there are some, in fact, in Spain, some of the most leading industrial ecosystems and clusters of SMEs and startups. And these are places where the framing of climate action and the framing of innovation to enhance business model development, business model transformation can be supported. I think I would probably argue towards the importance of creating criteria, incentives, as well as rules that make it harder for any business operating at any point starting now to simply cast itself in a shape that isn't fully decarbonized or fully sustainable and actually actively regenerative. And in fact, I was thinking the question, from my perspective, offsets is deeply, deeply worrying, because I think we are continuing to apply the question of market trading instead of grabbing with both hands the fact that we have to actually transform the way we think about materials and economies. I would wish to put to the mix, and it's one that's relevant for startups and for SMEs as well, changing demand. Change the entire upstream structure of what we're asking for as one of the #1 priorities. Yes, decarbonize fully, and only at the last minute are we really thinking about carbon sinks. But yes, again, I very much agree with Nuria. This is about really nature-based carbon sinks. We cannot rely on carbon capture technologies to save us. The last element I would have is one around an intergenerational perspective. Again, also very important for startups that are coming through. One of the big questions around offsets is who is making the decision to offset and who carries the responsibility for that. These decisions are being taken by people who are not living with the consequences of it. We need to be pulling intergenerational responsibility and intergenerational decision making into those decisions, because it will change our view on what we offset for how long and who carries that risk.
I think you're right. I mean, I think one of the points of transition we are at is, until this moment, offsetting has been blended somehow into a corporate reduction strategy, but it's actually not part of that, is it? It's actually a corporate reduction strategy needs to be absolute in the way that it goes about single-mindedly reducing emissions as fast as possible based on the targets that science dictates. Offsetting is almost needs another word to describe it, because it's something which is separate to that. It's a voluntary approach to accelerating things you can't do in the physical world. And I think it's obviously the clarity of thought that doesn't conflate those issues, which is the important, I think, realization of this. Let's move to the questions online. So Professor Ian Cochrane of the Edinburgh University actually has a couple of questions for you, Tony. But the ECB is calling for banks to implement and disclose transition plans to help manage their long-term climate compatibility, contribution to the goals and risk exposure. Can the guide we're talking about here help get us from voluntary action to something that's quickly going to become a regulated market practice? And he asks, can banks like BBVA encourage their clients to use types of guidelines to better understand their own climate and transition strategies, and in turn have an impact on engagement and influence other asset allocation decisions?
Well, on the first question, yes. I mean, this guide today is in line with what is defined for banks in the Nature Banking Alliance, as I said. So it's a nice 12 steps to do that. So yeah, it can be a quite practical tool to help banks to provide the response to the ECB. No, that because ECB and supervisors are understanding this double materiality, this rebound effect about climate as a financial risk. No, not only to take into account what is the financial risk today for the climate, but also if we get our clients more aligned, we are going at the end of the day reduce the traditional risk. So we are going to have less climate risk and less financial risk. So this is the conversation that we already have with them. No? And the second one about clients, we have to help our clients to make the transition. And we have, as I said, we have to help all our clients. We have to help this is not only financing the green ones on the green activities. We need to facilitate the investments in those activities that has to transform completely. And this will require a huge amount of investment. And maybe the starting point will be not so nice, because that company, maybe the intensity per unit produced is too high, but at the end they have a good plan to reduce that on a significant way and to be aligned with net zero, let's say in 10 years, 5 years time. We have to be with that client. So when we are not applying these metrics, these targets, using SDA or PACTA, using intensity metrics per kilowatt produced, for instance, for power, we have to take into account, okay, that we have clients that maybe are aligned with this pathway that we need for the net zero. There are some clients that they are maybe off track, but they have plans and investment plans to be on track. They are misaligned, but they are on track to be aligned in a short term. And then we will have clients that they are off track and misaligned because they don't have plans at all to do that. So, but in the middle, we have to help all those clients to invest, no? Otherwise, we are going to fail. I mean, so we have to and help even the brown ones because there are not only 50 shades of green, there are 50 shades of brown. Okay, and we have to use these targets. It's not easy to operationalize the use of these targets. It's not so easy to say, well, okay, we have this reduction, that's all. If we have now, tomorrow, a client that maybe it's out of this pathway, but they have plans to decarbonize very soon, very fast, and a credible plan, we have to finance them. That's so difficult. No, we have to have this forward-looking when setting targets and the dynamics that we are going to have at the sector level.
I'm pleased to hear that it seems to me to make you more aligned with your clients, and the advanced work that you're doing is going to help them move forwards. Before we turn the floor to Valvanera, who is running the Spanish Climate Change Office and head of the Spanish delegation here, I'd like to ask one final question, because Will Atkinson, who's representing Influence Map, and Influence Map is the fantastic NGO that actually provides the transparency on the lobbying activities and the advocacy activities which companies do, has noticed that the action point number 9 of our guide is around that transparency of climate policy engagement and public affairs, and aligning that with the Paris Agreement. And he asks, while there are some leaders, more progress is needed. How will the Spanish Green Growth Group lead this going forwards? And I wonder if there's anybody perhaps online that would like to take that question, or indeed hear. So I think it's a really important one, because we've just heard for so long how companies say one set of things in a public audience and then go and become members and pay lobbyists to say something different when it comes to the rulemaking. And it's something that's important and highlighted in our guide. So is there anyone who'd like to talk about the processes they have put in place on that?
I think it's a very relevant step. I like a lot this step because it's part of our responsibility as a big corporation. Is work not in our case not work for BBA. It's work from BBA. No? I try to mobilize the systemic change that we need, partnering with all stakeholders. So it is clear that we have to have a strong commitment on this, and with all the relationships that we have with the government supervisors, even with our colleagues, with our industry, no, within our industry. So I think it's a very relevant step. It's not mentioned normally in this type of guidelines.
I agree.
It's quite unique.
I think it is.
So when I saw that, when we developed the guideline, I thought that it was a good idea to put that clearly, because it is part of the game, you know, how we influence others and to engage with others to make this happen. We are not going to succeed unless our clients succeed and the government succeed. So we need everyone.
So on the point of talking and being able to engage directly and clearly with government, we'd now like to thank our panelists, both those two of our panelists online, here the two in the studio, very much for that engaging and excellent discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And if we can, I'd like to invite Valvanera Ulargui Aparicio, who is the Director General of Spain's Climate Change Office, the head of the Spanish delegation, from the Ministry of Energy Transition and Climate Change, to join us now virtually. Valvanera?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peter, and good afternoon to all of you. I'm very happy to join you, and I'm very impressed after hearing the fantastic overview of tangible examples of the Spanish companies. I think that we are in a process that needs this determination. We are in a process that needs to be clear on what we need to do in the next hours, in the next years, not in the long term, that also, but very, very pushing hard for credible action, you know, in the coming years. So there is no doubt that your leadership in climate agenda, you know, it's real, it's crucial, and it's very challenging. Let me also give a big thank to the Spanish Green Growth Group. for the guide, but also for being, you know, so pushing and so credible, you know, in the work that they do every day. They do pushing for more ambition. They do pushing for long-term signals from governments and communicating and visualizing the economic, social, and transformational opportunities behind taking this path of decarbonization. And it is really helpful. So I would like to thank you to all the members of the Spanish Green Growth Group. I think that Glasgow it's a very important milestone. We arrived this week with hugely impressive rally from private sector, putting all hands on deck in favor of climate ambition. Over half the sectors that make up the global economy are now committing to halve their emissions within the next decade and achieve near-term emission reduction targets. And this is impressive, and it's the way not to do things and to change the business as usual and the old-fashioned technologies. This responds to the clear understanding that we have at the government that we need plans to decarbonize beyond us, beyond governments, beyond regional and local institutions, and we must help and we must achieve near-term breakthroughs across every sector of the global economy. So the incremental step this year, as I said, it's very helpful, and now we have to commit, or all we know that committing to the net zero emissions by 2050 is not enough on its own. It's not enough for governments, and it's not enough also for companies. We also need actors to show we are serious about winning the race by advancing critical sectoral breakthroughs in line with halving emissions by 2030. And when I say all actors, you know, that includes every actor in the society, every actor in the private sector, and of course, every actor at government level. Achieving this will mean to change our status quo, will mean to scale the way we used to work, and we need more collaboration and more alignment with the Paris Agreement. It's not only a title, you know, it's real action on the ground. So first, we need governments to set up clear decarbonization objective, to say not only clear decarbonization objective, but to put, you know, the instruments and the tool to make them happen. So the legal frameworks are fine, but we need legal frameworks plus instruments, plus inversions, plus investments, and plus a new way of doing things at a governmental level. That means that the signals that we send to the outside world are real, consistent with the signals that we sign when we ratify the Paris Agreement. And that means that we need to make public procurement in a different way, that we need to make our investments in new renewable energies and new clean technologies in a different way, and that we need to make, you know, our legislative process in a very different way. And that's in that agenda is in the one that we are working hard from the government, changing our pillars, changing the way we used to do our day by day basis, and changing the way also we need to do to accompany, you know, the rest of the actors. Second, all the corporate pledges now need to materialize, that need right now to be at the front and to be congratulated on, need to be traceable from the qualitative and from the quantitative perspective. So these roadmaps, these objectives need to be also, you know, be traceable in a way that we know where we are all together. So the initiative that you are launching today, you know, are very useful and crucial for that, for the credibility of the system, but also, you know, to monitor our commitments and plan and report progress achieving them. You know, you hear yesterday the Secretary General asking for standards, not to be all comparable. And I think that it's a way to make the things in the right direction. Spain already has leading companies, many of them are already there. You have choose the net zero and the resilient path as a business strategy, and I want to highlight the importance of the resilient path and the adaptation policies. I think that is the new economy that we need to push all together, and that we need to boost on that, especially in a country like in Spain. We need to create green infrastructure. We need to protect our biodiversity, and we need to do it in a way that is profitable to the local communities, but also to the companies and to the society as a whole. So the way that we are approaching COP26, it's very challenging. We need to close a lot of texts at diplomatic and negotiation levels, but I think that is also very challenging in a way that it's time to rally even more commitments and ambition action from non-governmental actors. And I said that not because we as government, we don't have to make a very incremental steps in ambition and to close all the gaps for the 1.5 is our first task, and it's our first responsibility for finance and also for adaptation of loss and damage. But I think that the COP presents, also a very good opportunity to work together and to amplify the role of companies of all sizes and from all sectors. Not only large companies that have the capacity to lead the way and to drive action in their supply chain, but also the SMEs, because I think that they have enormous potential as drivers of change by operating in the areas closest to the consumer. So take this COP, as an opportunity to also, amplify the commitments and the powerful signals to build on all the sectors and on all the sizes of the different companies. And I think that we have a strong foundation from Madrid. We did a lot of work on the climate action agenda at that COP, but if we really want to make this the new norm, we really need the private sector and investors, within the COPs and within, the process of decision making. So let's help, the front runners and let's make them to contagion the rest of the actors. We need to avoid the greenwashing, and that's why we need, to be credible and to be traceable. And we also need, to make this agenda, as a win-win agenda, as an agenda for more progress at social level, but for more profitable at business level, but for being, more credible, from the outside world. It's very, very, very useful, all your work. It's very, very helpful. And it's a way, and it's the COP to make it, amplify in the ambitious from the ambition perspective, but also from the traceability perspective, because it will help, as I say, to sum up all the efforts to close this gap to the 1.5. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Valvanera, and thank you to your contribution here. I know you're going to come to help close these negotiations. And thank you also to Spain for, together with Chile, being the physical host, and Chile, of course, being the president of COP25. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome on stage Andrés Lendereche. Andrés is the head of delegation for Chile, a special advisor to Minister Schmidt, who is the COP25 president. And he joins us from Chile and give us that perspective on these proceedings from his extensive experience. Thank you, Andrés.
You mean I'm very old, huh? Okay, this is nice. Thank you, Peter. Dear panel and participant at this COP26 side event on ScottishPower headquarters. It is a great pleasure indeed to join you and speak on behalf of Chile and the COP25 presidency. I would like to thank those that have made this event possible. First, the Spanish Green Growth Group and Climate Strategy for developing the best practices guide presented today, and for organizing this event, and Iberdrola and ScottishPower for powering and hosting this event. It is indeed a pleasure to have been invited to disclosure and keynote with my colleague Valvanera Ulargui from the Spanish Climate Change Office. In the same fashion that Spain hosted the Chilean presidency for the last COP25 in 2019, both countries have joined forces again for this event. Our combined efforts to successfully organize COP25 with such short notice show how, through the power of collaboration, we can accelerate climate action. A special and a strong bond exists between Spain and Latin American countries, as reflected in this mission and spirit of the best practices guide that the Spanish Green Growth Group presents here today. This forward-looking guide has been developed and supported by Spanish companies and banks with a large carbon footprint in Latin America. The launch of this guide is a stepping stone to further collaboration between companies from both regions. We can expect this collaboration to drive greater climate action in Latin American countries towards the goals set by the Paris Agreement. The IPCC 6 assessment report clearly signals a red code alert for our planet. Deep and immediate reductions in greenhouse gas emissions are needed to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. The private sector plays a pivotal role in doing this. We cannot reach net zero emissions by 2050 without ambitious corporate climate action. The Best Practices Guide, launched today, establishes a robust, science-based trajectory for companies in Latin America to come on board with credible climate action, fully in line with the 1.5 degree target. The international community must urgently step up with more ambitious NDCs. In this spirit, in April last year, in the middle of the pandemic, Chile presented a significantly enhanced NDC that aligns with the carbon neutrality by 2050 in accordance with the Paris Agreement. Although the task we are facing is enormous and complex, this best practice guide can serve as a support for companies to accelerate the implementation of long-term net zero goals in the short-term climate action. Its three pillars of analysis for target setting, climate actions, and good governance is a vital framework to ensure that the private sector hits the net zero target by 2050. As my colleague Peter Sweatman highlighted in his presentation, the greatest impact of COP26 will be to advance companies' climate ambition. It is a pleasure to see that today's event and the launch of this guide will contribute to this opportunity and accelerate corporate cooperation in the fight against climate change. Thank you again to the organizers and sponsors of this event. Thank you very much. My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, I would like to finish thanking to Ms. Valvanera Ulargui and Andrés Landerreche for this fantastic closure to our event, as well as to our panelists for this insightful discussion, and Peter Sweatman for leading the technical development of our guide. I would also like to thank our member companies Ecoavantis for providing their design services to create many of the graphics we've used for the presentation and for this event, and also Ecoterrae for making this event carbon neutral, as they mentioned. And finally, I would like to thank all our online and physical attendees, as well as the Glasgow Chamber of Commerce, the University of Glasgow, the University of Strathclyde, the University of Edinburgh, and Glasgow Caledonian University. Thank you very much. I would like to remind you, that you can access the English and Spanish versions of the guide through the QR code that you can see on the screen. And if you have any further questions, please get in touch with us. I don't know if we can provide the details of, yep.
Yeah, I think the Get the Guide has the details.
Okay, so you will be able to see our contact details and social media details in the guides, as well as climate strategies, contact details, and social media. Thank you very much. Goodbye to everyone and enjoy COP26. Thanks. Thank you.